behalf of the Bridgman Public Library, welcome to all who are attending tonight's program. We sure appreciate that you've taken the leap into something new. And actually Zoom may not feel new anymore, but we appreciate what it has taken for folks to get acclimated to a new way of participating in these kinds of programs. So we're glad about that. So what we'll also do is we'll be monitoring the chat function. So that's something that is always an option for communicating with Bob during the course of the program. So feel free to do that. Bob, I didn't ask you, but I'm assuming that if we have a question and answer period at the end of the program, is that?
Yeah, what we can do, Dennis, is if you have questions, just put them into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat as we go along. Okay. So if there's if there's something you'd like a little clarification on right away, that's great. If it's something you just want to pose at the end, that's great too. But we'll try to just kind of play it loosey-goosey with it. We don't have a huge number of people, so it shouldn't be any issue at all.
Yeah, that sounds great. Good.
And if I don't know the answer, I just make it up. So
that's the best way.
That's absolutely right.
All right. So with no further ado, I want to welcome Bob Myers from the Historical Society of Michigan. Let's get that right. So Bob is here to talk to us about how to research historic homes, and it sounds like a very comprehensive way to be able to suss out information about who lived there as well as the building itself. And something that I noticed about Bob is I think he must be a multi-talented kind of guy, because it looks like you do you portray some historical characters. Is that correct, Bob?
Yeah, I do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that's great. So while we're focused on houses here, I've already learned that the longer you talk to Bob, there are all kinds of things Bob knows. So I look forward to hearing. Okay, no pressure, Bob.
No pressure.
But well, welcome Bob Myers, and look forward to hearing what Bob has to say.
All right. Well, thanks, Dennis.
Take it away, Bob.
All right. Well, this program kind of came about from my experiences in St. Joseph. My wife and I lived in Berrien County for many, many years, and we had a historic house in downtown St. Joseph on State Street. Some of you may be familiar with that area. We were right behind Krasel Art Center, to give you an idea. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our house there as a case study. But we wanted to know about the history of the house. And so my wife and I started doing research on it. And one thing led to another. We ended up doing about 40 house histories there in the area. And so out of that developed this program, If These Walls Could Talk, researching your old house. And if you live in an old house, or maybe you're crazy like I am and always wanted to, you want to know things about it. When was it built? Who built it? Who lived there? What's the story of that house? And come on now, there we go. And so out of that too came a program that we've started here at Historical Society of Michigan that I'm going to be talking about a little bit more later. Michigan Heritage Homes, and there are Michigan Historic Sites. You're all probably familiar with these green markers that you see around. Those are put up by the Michigan Historical Commission. Here at Historical Society of Michigan, we just started a Michigan Heritage Home program a couple of months ago, debuted that. And come on there. And I always say that, whoops, let me go back here. Come on, my computer's not. Okay. I always say that a house doesn't have to be a mansion to have a history. And often we think of historic houses as having to be great big houses, grand houses. They have to be something like Monticello or Mount Vernon. If a president didn't live there or George Washington didn't sleep there, it can't be a historic house. Well, nonsense. All old houses have a history. If your house is any age at all, it has a history. And is it important? Well, yeah, it's important because I live there. That's my house. That makes it important. So if you have an old house, you know what I mean. It doesn't have to be associated with a famous person, a big famous event to have a great history. And so I wanted to find out about the history of my house. Now, this is one in St. Joseph, and right on, let's see, this is on Lake Boulevard, one that we researched. And where do you begin? You have an old house like this. Well, how do you know when it was built or who lived there? Well, it takes some research. It's not rocket science, but it takes some diligence. It may be fairly easy. Sometimes you can do it in a few minutes and find out who built it and when. Sometimes, like our house, it took a couple of years of digging around, and that wasn't, working on it all the time, but quite a bit of work. Well, you might get lucky. So if you want to start researching your house, you might get lucky. Every once in a while, you find one with a date right on it. Maybe the basement has a cement basement floor and somebody's put the date in it. That may not be when the house was built because they may have poured a floor later on. You might have a cornerstone. Some houses do, or they'll have the date in a stone over like a doorway, but most of us aren't that lucky. Never hurts. It's great if somebody did that, but you have to really be lucky to have that. So you're not going to be that lucky, probably. So now you're going to have to do some detective work. So like Inspector Clouseau here, you're going to have to go looking for clues. You're going to have to uncover the history of your house in a detective search. Well, the way I start is I go the low-hanging fruit. What's the easiest thing to do? Talk with former owners, talk with neighbors. What do they know about your house? Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt sometimes, but it sure is easy to just talk with them and ask them if they know anything. Who used to live there? And I grew up in a little tiny burg up in Northeast Michigan, and you had places that were, it was the Smith house. Well, the Smith family hadn't lived there in 100 years, but it was still the Smith house. So neighbors may know some things about the house. So talk with them. Start out that way. Next thing is, and this is very important, is what's the style of the house? And as you do your detective search, what you're doing is you're narrowing down progressively the years in which the house could have been built. So the earliest it could have been built and the latest it could have been built. Well, when you start, the earliest or the latest it could have been built is probably 2020. Last year. The earliest, well, if you're in Berrien County, about 1830, because that's when the area was settled. So you've got a pretty broad age span there, about 180 years to work with, or 190 years to work with. So you narrow it down. Well, first way to do that is what's the style of your house? And just like clothing style, architectural styles, the designs of houses come into and go out of fashion. So it's like these dresses that the women here are wearing, or the girl on the left. Now she's got a hoop skirt on. Now you don't need to know anything about the girl in the picture or when the photograph was taken to know that the hoop skirt came into fashion about, I think about 1858 or 59. And it went out of fashion right after the Civil War. So you see a picture of that girl in a hoop skirt, that's 1860s. The girls on the left, young women on the left, screams 1970s, you know, the pantsuits, the pastels, that kind of thing, mini skirts. So you know right away, these photographs have to have been in the 1970s. Houses are the same way. Architectural style. Well, how do you know what architectural style your house is? Well, you can consult with an architectural historian or an architect. You can go to the library, like Bridgman Library, and or you can buy this online. There are a million different architectural style books. This is my favorite by far. And no, I'm not related to the authors. But it's called A Field Guide to American Houses. It's still in publication. You can buy it. You can get it secondhand on a Libris or something too. But it has, I love the book because it has every architectural style used in America in a home. It has lots and lots and lots of photographs of the houses, a little history of of the architectural style, drawings of the key features of it, everything. And if you think, oh, come on, it doesn't have every style of house. It does. It has ranch style, Queen Anne, Greek Revival. It has Quonset huts, teepees, wigwams. Everything is in there. It's amazing. So if you're wondering, well, what book should I get this one. It's by far the best. All right, so you look at a house, and you've probably heard it before, and we've heard it about our house in St. Joseph. Oh my goodness, my house, I know that it's at least 200 years old. Well, but now wait a minute. We said a house in Berrien County could be built between 1830 and 2020. That's a 190-year span. Well, but if you know the architectural style, like this one, which is Queen Anne, already we know that this house is a relatively narrow time span, because Queen Anne style came into fashion about 1885, just like a dress style or a suit style. Comes into fashion about 1885. By 1910, people aren't building it anymore. So if you have a Queen Anne style house, already you've got it narrowed down to about a 25-year time span in which that house could have been built. Well, why couldn't it have been built earlier than that? Nobody was building that style. Why not later? It was out of fashion, just like a dress style. And this is true of pretty much all architectural styles. Greek Revival, for example, we have Greek Revival style homes in Berrien County, especially Niles, Buchanan, St. Joseph has a couple, Berrien Springs has a few, because these towns were founded back in the 1830s, 40s. So Greek Revival, well, about 1830 to 1860. If you've got a Greek Revival house, that's when it was built, somewhere in that 30-year span. Now, most houses are not one style or another, not a perfect example. This one, for example, in Berrien Springs, probably built around 1860. It has some Greek Revival elements to it. But again, knowing that style, you know that it's probably a late Greek Revival style house. Gothic Revival, not too many in Berrien County. Niles has a few, Buchanan has a few. Again, a very short or relatively short time span, about 1840 to 1870. Here's a farmhouse in Berrien Springs. This photograph happens to have been taken in 1880. House still stands, by the way. But it's probably built around 1880. It has Italianate details to it. This is much more typical of Italianate, kind of the grand style of Italianate. We have gobs of them in Berrien County. But the big overhanging cornice brackets up here, decorative cornice brackets, they tend to have a flat roof or nearly flat. The windows with the heavy window hoods, that's Italianate. And those were built about 1860 to 1885, about a 25, maybe a 30-year span. So again, knowing that, here's a Sears Roebuck house. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. But Sears, Michigan was a mecca for kit homes, kind of the IKEA of homes. You bought them from Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward or Aladdin. A lot of them were made in Bay City, and they were brought in by rail. You had to have a railroad in your town, and you might be able to find a Sears home in the architectural style books. This is one in St. Joseph, a craftsman style, popular in the 19-teens and 20s. And again, that field guide to American houses will tell you what style it is. This one, some of you might recognize in St. Joseph, built by Phil DeAndrea, one of Al Capone's henchmen. And you get these stories, you talk to neighbors and they tell you, that house was built by one of Al Capone's men. And you think, yeah, sure. Well, this is one that my wife and I researched. Do you want to know who really built it? At one of Al Capone's men. Yeah, the story was absolutely true. By the way, this house still, I took that photo a few years ago. House is in beautiful condition, still stands. Built in 1933 at a cost of $40,000. What's going on in 1933 nationally? The Great Depression. Yeah. Yeah, those Chicago mobsters, they had a lot of money. $40,000. If you had a job back then, you were making maybe $2,500, $3,000 a year. He put $40,000 into his summer home. Not too bad. Crime does pay. Now, you do have to be aware of remodelings. A bad remodeling. It's called a remodeling. This is one in Berrien Springs. Beautiful Italianate-style farmhouse built in 1879. Kind of at the height of the Italianate style. The house still stands, but it has been drastically changed. Wide gauge vinyl siding or aluminum siding. They've closed in the porch on the side. I couldn't get a photo from the same angle, but you can see here we've got the open porch there, and this wonderful bay window on the front and one on the side. Here the bay window's been screwed up. They've screwed up the windows. They've closed the porch in, put a big fire escape thing on the back. So it's been remodeled. And sometimes you have to have an eye for the architectural style to realize what it is or what it was. Sometimes the remodeling can be so bad that you really can't tell. The house on the lower right, I think, is probably a Queen Anne, or used to be, because of the round tower there. The one on the upper left, your guess is as good as mine. It's so screwed up that I don't know what it was. Yeah, you could restore it maybe if you knew what it looked like, but it would take a lot of money. So you've worked out and figured out, you've worked on through the books and so forth, and you've realized that your house is a particular architectural style, craftsman, Queen Anne, Greek Revival, whatever. All right, next thing, and this is again a little bit of low-hanging fruit. Go around the house, look at some of the details in the house. You might find patent dates on pulleys and door hardware and so forth. If you happen to have an original toilet or bathtub or sink, those manufacturing dates are stamped right on them. The back of the toilet tank or inside the toilet tank, under the bathtub, underneath the sink, they stamp it right in the porcelain. So those can be useful. You might find dates written on things. You never know where you can find it, but that can be useful. Another piece of low-hanging fruit, the nails in the house. What are the nails? Now, in Michigan, our houses don't date back before 1800, unless you're maybe down in Monroe or up on Mackinac Island or something. but hand forged nails, those were made individually by a blacksmith. We rarely have that in Michigan, but you do have a lot of cut nails in houses. And a cut nail, as the name implies, it was machine made. It was just, they chopped the nail off from a bar of steel, and it would go through a chopping machine, and the machine would chop it, and another machine would put a head on it. And so the nail is square in cross section. Then about 1900, the wire nail comes into play. And that's the same kind of nail we get from a hardware today. Same thing. So if you look at the nail heads, and the nail head is round or circular in like a modern nail, that's a wire nail, and the house was built probably after about 1900. If it's got a square head or slightly rectangular head, that's a cut nail, and the house was built prior to 1900. Kind of works out nicely, 1800, 1900, when these nails came into use. It's kind of a handy way of dating the house. So maybe you have one that you think, a house that you think was built right around the turn of the century, say Queen Anne, about 1885 to 1910. But you go down in the basement and you look up the basement ceiling where the original woodwork, construction work is still visible, and it's made out of wire nails. It's probably built after 1900. You've narrowed it down a little bit more. All right. Yeah, I mentioned the kit homes, and you can find catalogs. The catalogs are available online. I love the internet. Library of Congress has a lot of them online, and they give you the floor plan of the house. Of course, a lot of them have been altered, and so it may be a little hard to tell for sure what did your house come out of the catalog from this particular year? This is from Sears, but again, Aladdin, Montgomery Ward, I can't even think of all the different manufacturers. There are a lot of them. And usually they tend to be smaller houses, one-story bungalows like this one, but they did have some large ones too. All right, now we're going to get into we're getting away from the low-hanging fruit. And now you're going to have to go into a little bit more digging. You've got it narrowed down by the architectural style. Maybe you found some dates from hardware and so forth. All right. Well, here you can look at plat maps. And in Berrien County, there were three that really come into play. One was a wall map, but it's been reproduced as an atlas. That was done in 1860. There's one in 1880, or one in 1873, and another in 1887. They're available online. A lot of the libraries have them. University of Michigan Library has a lot of them online, including those from Berrien County. All right, well, here's St. Joseph in 1887. And so what you're seeing here are you can see the streets laid out. There's Lake Michigan out there. And the streets are there, and the lots and lot numbers. And you can see these little squares, rectangles, L-shaped things there. Those are houses. And so you can look on these atlases and the plat maps for the town. These are there's ones for the township in the atlas too. So you'd find one for Lake Township and Niles Township and so forth. That'll take you out into the countryside, and you can look and you can see if there was a house there at that time. So maybe here in 1873 you've got a vacant lot, but in 1887 there's a house on it. Good indication that your house was built between the times those two atlases were produced. And so these atlases, plat maps, can be very useful. Sanborn fire insurance maps. They were not produced for all towns, but for many, Berrien Springs, Niles, Buchanan, St. Joseph, Benton Harbor. They were made by the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company. And the good folks at Sanborn were very interested in assessing fire risk in a town. And so here we have, this is Berrien Springs. And I just did a detail of the map, but they're wonderful. You can see all the buildings here in a very nice footprint of the building. So for example, right here on, this is lot number 142 in Berrien Springs, corner of East Pitt and South Main. And if that's your house, that footprint is going to be very recognizable as your home. And great detail. They're color coded. There's a key to them on the first page. But yellow means it's a wood frame building. Up here we have a bunch of pink buildings. What are those? Yeah, brick. What about this one right here? Yellow on the inside and pink on the outside. Well, it's a wood frame building with a brick veneer. Here we have a blue one, that's cement block. And they have some other things too, stone and so forth. But let's say that this is your house right down here. It's a D is for dwelling. And this part is 2-story. Here's a 1-story section. Little 1-story porch. The little dotted line indicates a porch. And the X and the little dots, I forget what those are. There's might be the location of a stove. I forget just what it is. But at any rate, they produce these Sanborn maps every few years, about every 5, 6, 7 years. Sanborn would come out with a new one. And those are great for us as researchers because you can look on the Sanborn map. Maybe in 1931, there's your house right there. In 1926, it's a vacant lot. Aha. Probably your house was built between the time the 1926 Sanborn map came out and the 1931 map came out. Now, the only drawback with Sanborn maps is that they are primarily, the Sanborn Company focused on the downtown area. So if you're getting out a little ways in town, the map, they didn't cover your area of town. As time went by and the town got bigger, Sanborn went farther and farther and farther out into town. But you may not have your area of town covered. If you're lucky, if you live right downtown and they cover it, oh, you're golden, it's great. They started producing these maps, I think in the 1880s, might have gone a little earlier in some areas, but in Berrien County in the 1880s, and they kept producing them up into the 1930s. I think the company is still around, actually, but that was kind of their heyday. Now you might have bird's eye views. These were just all the rage in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. This is Berrien Springs, about 1890. And they did them of Niles and Buchanan and Berrien Springs and St. Joseph and Benton Harbor, maybe some other towns too, I'm not sure, in the area. But a lot of the libraries have them, historical societies do. And you can look on the map, the bird's eye view rather, and see if your house is there. Now, as you get closer to where the bird was looking from, you can see a little more detail. You get out here and the edge of town, it's a little harder to see, but still it's quite useful. Now we're getting into the real nitty gritty. All right, maybe you've got it narrowed down to say a 10-year span that you think your house would have been built, was probably built. Okay, now comes the time-consuming part. And it ain't easy. Well, it ain't rocket science, but it's time consuming. Tax rolls. They have them at the county treasurer's office there in the administration building in St. Joseph. And what you need to do is go through the tax rolls and you can look for a jump in the assessed value of your property. because if you build a house, the value of your property is going to go up. Nobody escapes paying taxes, sorry. So here, for example, we have Mrs. A. Jennings, and she is paying taxes on 2 pieces of property. And reading the lines here, the handwriting, one is the north 1/2 of lot number 183 in the original plat of St. Joseph. That's one parcel of property. And the description of the property is going to read the same whether you have a house on it or not. It can be vacant land, it can have a 20-story building, and it'll read the same way. But over here, we have the cash value of that parcel of property, $800. Well, this is about 1900. If the property value was $800, it had a house on it. Probably not a grand 4-story house that took up the whole lot, but a nice house was there. Now, she also owns the southwest 40 feet of lot 4, block 42 in Hoyt's second addition to St. Joseph. And you can find that. If you're curious about, well, how do I know what property description I have? Look on your tax bill. That's where you'll find it. Still the same, all these years later. Well, that southwest 40 feet of a lot, it's valued at $300. All right, so maybe a small building on it of some kind. It might be vacant at only $300. A little hard to tell. Now, the trouble or the challenge with the tax rolls is that they are not indexed by the property description. They are indexed by or they are ordered by the last name of the owner. So all the J's will be together, all of the K's, the L's, and so forth. Well, what if you don't know who the property owner was back then? Well, you're going to have to go through page by page by page. But there's a shortcut, and I'll get to that. All right, so here's what we're looking for in the tax rolls. And this is a different piece of property here, but I wanted to give you the idea. We look here, this is first ward of St. Joseph City in 1892. And we're looking at the north half of lot number 184. In 1892, it's owned by John Watson. The assessed value is $200. Look what happens in 1893. Now it's owned by Mrs. S.T. Cooper. We have an ownership change. So sometime in late 1892 or maybe early 93, Mrs. S.T. Cooper bought the lot. And the value has quadrupled. Something happened to quadruple the value of that 1/2 lot in a year. Probably the construction of a house. And you can see here in 1894, 95, 97, and you see here the ward has changed. The political boundaries of the ward has changed. She's gone from being in the first ward to in the third ward. But the property value stays about the same, around $1,000, a little bit more or less. Here it goes up quite a bit, maybe in addition to the house, maybe a garage or something like that. I don't know what. But here in 1892, 93, the value of the lot the half lot has quadrupled. That indicates the construction of a house. And that's why the tax rolls are so valuable, is you can look for that jump in valuation. Now, we want to leapfrog a little bit. You know, you say, well, I'll look in the tax rolls, but I don't know who owned the lot in 1910. I have no idea. Am I going to have to go through several books of tax rolls looking for that property value? Well, you might, but there's another way to do it. And that is, some kind of genealogical research. Look in the census. Yeah, is there anybody home? Yeah, anybody living there in 1910, 1920? Before I think 1900, maybe they didn't put the street address in, but they did in these later ones. And the census is now available up through 1940. And so you look, and here we are in St. Joseph, and maybe your house is number 1114 Pearl Street. Well, there's Emily, not sure how that's pronounced, Neefhouse, something like that. And Sam Leader and Matilda, his wife, are also living there. So they probably it's like a duplex or something, or she's renting out rooms, or I don't know, maybe they just have an open marriage. I don't know what it is, not my business. But anyway, if your house is at 1114 Pearl Street and somebody was living there in 1920, there must be a house there. And now you know the owner of the home. And you don't have to dig through page after page after page of the tax rolls. You can go right to the ends, and you can look for Emily there in 1920. Now, one thing to be aware of is that sometimes because city managers are evil, they would change the street numbers or even street names. For example, I live on Lincoln Street in Grand Ledge, but back in the day it was called Railroad Street. And they changed the name of the street for whatever reason, and they renumbered the houses. But it's a great way to kind of leapfrog a little bit and look at whether somebody was living there at that house. Now you might go back to the where are we here? Okay, yeah, these atlases, and for example, shoot, I can't think now what Vine Street is, but back in the day, right below the bluff, that was called Vine Street, and now it's renamed. But you can look in the atlas and you can see if your street used to have a different name and different house numbers. So here we have, but here we have this one. It's a good way to, let's say that you go back to 1920, and sure enough, someone is living there. Wow, it already takes you back 100 years. All right. Next thing, you can trace, and again, you don't have to do these in this order. You can do one or the other. You might look at the property ownership. Start with yourself when you bought the house and go and work backward. These are at the Register of Deeds office. They're very helpful there, and you can research it. Now, you might have an abstract of title, but they stopped requiring those about, 35, 40 years ago. But if you bought your house and you have one, great, you're golden. You can go right through those. But you can do it there at the Register of Deeds office. It's just time consuming. So here, for example, in 1999, Gerald and Kimberly Wohan buy the house from the Bringlesons, who had it for all of about 2 weeks. I don't know what was going on there, but they bought it from a Thomas Sonneman, who bought it back in 1937, or actually Clara Sonneman did. I bet that's Thomas's mother. She bought it in 1937 from Frances Moulton, who was the executrix of an estate, probably her mother's estate. That goes back to 1908. So what are you looking for here? Well, for one thing, that'll help you on finding the names in the tax rolls, so that you're not having to go page by page by page. But also, a lot of times people would buy property with the intent of building. And so maybe when you go back one more owner here, Richmond Stalin, however you pronounce his name, he bought Lot 1, Block 68 from somebody who owned maybe 8 or 10 lots. Well, maybe he bought that single lot in November of 1908, or whenever it was. I guess he sold it in 1908, but maybe he bought it in 1898, let's say. Why would he buy just one lot? Well, maybe he bought it to build on. That's a good guess. And so look under his name, S, in the property tax rolls, and see if maybe in 1899, if the property value on that lot went way up, indication that a house was built. Yeah, here's the abstracts of title. If you're really lucky, you might have one. My wife and I have never been that lucky. But if you have one, these used to be required. And if you inherited one from the former owner, boy, that's great, because it has all of the property ownership changes in it, going right back to the time that somebody bought the land from the federal government. City directories are great. They don't necessarily go back as far as you want them to date-wise. In St. Joseph, they go back to about 1896. I don't know about some of the other towns in the area, but they list owners' names. So again, you might start with a city directory to find out who owned your house at a given time. And so here's a page from one in 1960. Clyde Boone and his wife Nora, they're the first ones up there. He works at Whirlpool Corporation, and they have a house on Taylor Street. And these are indexed, the later ones anyway are indexed. So if you're looking at it and you say, well, I don't know who the heck owned my house in 1960. Well, there is in the back an address index. So you can go to your address, Taylor Street, find out who is living at 2000 Taylor Street, and it'll say Boone, Clyde M. Okay, and then you can go back to the page there. So the city directories can be very, very helpful, determining, again, was there a house there? Somebody was living there at that address. There must have been a house. And also, who was it? Getting names. So the census, the city directories, and all of that sort of thing will help clue you into the people who were living there. Small town newspapers are great, and now they're being digitized, so you can do keyword searches. You can search for property owner names. You can search for street addresses, and it'll bring it up. It's not perfect, because some of those papers are damaged, hard for the optical character recognition program to work, but it can save you hours of time. But the newspapers covered everything. Your business was everybody's business. And they would report on things like houses being built. Newspaper editors loved that because it was a sign of progress in town. So here, for example, in St. Joseph, we have one in 1891. Mrs. E.M. Vanderveer of Chicago has bought a house and 2 lots. She's planning to move the house to the south lot, and she plans to build a handsome home on the corner. Aha. Well, maybe you have a nice big house on the corner of State and Hatch Streets. Is it the house that she built? Now remember, just because she plans to build the house doesn't mean she ever did. Keep looking in the paper. Well, in February of 1892, that winter, yeah, she's put out contracts for the construction work. Mr. Starr has the contract for the carpenter work, Versaw for the masonry work, and they're telling you how much your house is going to cost. Yeah, your business is everybody's business. You have no secrets in a small town. And in April, yeah, they've started work on the house. So it is, in fact, being built. Oddly enough, on this, a lot of times the newspapers will tell you when somebody moved in, but they didn't in this case. But in 1893, there's a report of a fire that started nearby. And so evidently by the fall of 1893, the house was finished. So I would guess that since they started work in April, they probably finished it up that fall of 1892. Now, a bit of warning. Not every house has a happy history, and you may find out more than you wanted to know. That happens. If you've got an old house, bad things may have happened, or uncomfortable things. And you have to decide, can I cope with that living in this old house? If your house is 100, 120 years old, mine's 118 years old, probably someone died in the house. In fact, the original owners of our house, both the husband and wife, they both died in the house. They lived there for many years and they died there. Does that bother you? Not everybody back then died in a clean hospital bed like they do now. People tended to die at home. Suicides. There are a surprising number of suicides. Will that bother you? Murders. You'll find things in the newspapers about this. And will it bother you that somebody hanged themselves in the basement? So just be aware of that. It's not every house has a happy history. More often, though, they are happy histories. Even if there was something sad. Well, the owners of my house, they both died there, but they had a lot of happy years there too. Yeah, you have stories in the newspapers of weddings in your house, and somebody gave birth to their children there in the house, and there were Christmas parties and teas, and the church Sunday school class came over and they had a wonderful party there, and most often it's happy things too. But it's life. Good things and bad things happen. So just be aware of that. All right. So you have stories of people. We want to know about people that lived there. This is my house in Grand Ledge. I love this picture, taken probably right after the house was built in 1903. And I feel like with our house that we don't really own the house so much as we're caretakers of it. And our job is to pass along this house to the next owners in maybe better condition than we got it. It's been remodeled a little bit, not too badly. Still very recognizable. It committed a lumicide. That was not our doing. And the porch has been altered a little bit. But, this was the Shane's house. There's Delbert Shane on the left. He owned the jewelry store in town. The store is still there. And I like the idea that we have Delbert Shane's house and we're maintaining it. We're restoring it. There are some things that got screwed up over the years. We're unscrewing them and trying to keep Delbert and Marguerite's house in good condition so that we can pass it on to the next generation of homeowners. All right, well, I'm going to run through very quickly a case study. This is our former house in St. Joseph on State Street. We bought it in 1998. It was a tear down when we bought it. One of the neighbors came over and said, my husband and I thought about buying that house just to tear it down so that we could get rid of it. It was an absolute eyesore. And but my wife and I liked the house. We could see that it had some potential to it. And it hadn't been screwed up on the inside too much. It was a wreck, but the original woodwork, doors, and so forth were still there. So when we bought it, and it was covered with asphalt shingle siding, and it was really in pathetic condition. So we talked to the original owners. When was the house built? And not the original owners, but actually they were the grandchildren of the original owner. And they said, well, we don't know, but we know that the house was built at least 150 years ago. Well, that would make it built in 1848. Nonsense. They're wrong. The house is, I called it a poor man's Queen Anne. It was built as a Queen Anne style house, 1885 to 1910. That's the time span it could have been built. So it wasn't 150 years old. Well, we went looking for physical clues, and we got lucky. We found an 1887 patent date on a window pulley. And so we know that pulley was put in after 1887. Now, the screwy thing was that it had a window pulley, but the window sashes, which we thought were original, had no attachment points for sash cords. It never had sash cords. So why would they have a window frame, a window casing with window pulleys when you couldn't attach sash cords to them? Well, we didn't know, but we thought, well, maybe they replaced the window. It looks original, but maybe they replaced it at some point. Well, we looked at bird's eye views. There's one in 1870 for St. Joseph. That's this one. There seemed to not be a house on the lot. But an 1887 bird's eye view seemed to show, it was a little hard to tell, but it seemed like there was a house there. Okay, so the house must have been built sometime before 1887, although you have that window pulley that wasn't made until 1887, so that's kind of puzzling. Well, we looked at Sanborn maps. Well, this is the 1908 Sanborn map, and there's our house, definitely our house. Two-story main body of the house, this one-story section here. Here's that kind of funny porch that goes off at an angle. Definitely our house. But the 1908 map was the first one that showed our area of town. So it didn't really help that much. We knew that the house had to predate 1908. So it was kind of nice to be able to say, yeah, it was there in 1908, but we kind of figured that anyway. Well, we looked at atlases. 1873 Atlas of Berrien County, St. Joseph there, it was a vacant lot. The house was definitely after 1873. We kind of figured that. But the 1887 Atlas, that plat map of St. Joseph showed a house on the site. Now, it wasn't as detailed as a Sanborn map. We couldn't tell for sure if it was our house, but there was a house there. So now we're figuring that this house had to have been built right around the late 1880s, but it didn't quite work because we have that window pulley from 1887, and 1887 is kind of early for a Queen Anne style house. Ours seemed to be a little later in the Queen Anne time frame than that. But it just didn't quite, none of it was really making sense. Late 19th century, but we couldn't figure it out. We looked at the nails and so forth, cut nails in the house. That's pre-1900, so that's good. Looked at city directories. You know, there weren't any in St. Joseph before 1900. Well, there was one in 1896, but the run of the directories didn't start until 1900. And, yeah, okay, that didn't help a whole lot. The property tax rolls were vague. It was owned by, this is our house right here, Mrs. Amanda Jennings. But all through the 1880s and 90s, the property taxes stayed about the same value. We didn't see that jump in property taxes. So that really didn't help a lot. And we were just getting stymied. Census records, well, there was somebody there in 1900 in the census. Amanda Jennings was listed. Yep, sure enough, she's there. But the 1890 census is missing. That's the one we really needed. We know the house was built after about 1880, but it would have really been helpful to have that 1890 census, but it's destroyed. It's no longer in existence. That didn't help much. Well, what really broke the case, and this is where just all this research finally came into play. I was doing research in the newspaper looking for something else. And now that the papers are digitized, I would have saved a couple of years of research work, but they weren't at that time. So this is what happened. I'm looking through the newspaper, something unrelated in 1892 in the paper, and there's a little article, little blurb. Mrs. Amanda Jennings and her family are moving into their nice new home on State Street. We said, what the heck is this about? This is 1893. This is after or late 1892, I think. This is after when the house should have been built. And why are they moving into a new home? That shouldn't be our house. Are they moving into a different house? But the census and the city directories showed that she was living there after that time period. So what's going on? Why are they moving into a new house? And so I started going back in time in the newspaper, and a few weeks later, or earlier, excuse me, a few weeks earlier than that, there's a little story in there, a little blurb in the paper saying that Amanda Jennings, or work is progressing on the Jennings home, the Amanda Jennings home, in the burned over district. I said, burned over district, what's that? And I kept going back further and further in the paper. And to give you make the long story short, we figured out what happened. In October of 1891, there was a big fire in St. Joseph. It burned down Amanda Jennings' home. And they rebuilt that spring. That's why the property tax rolls didn't show an increase in value. They built a house that was about the same size as their former one, probably. Where did things like that window pulley come in? We found out they were reusing material from probably the former house and maybe neighbors' houses that burned. He said, well, hey, this door is still in good shape. We'll just reuse it. The newspaper also said that they were underinsured. They were only insured for about half the value of their house. So they were probably hurting for money and rebuilding in a hurry. So we figured out this, in fact, was the Amanda Jennings house built in 1892. And I was a museum curator. You got to label everything. So we made a sign that went out there on the picket fence of our house, telling that it was the passersby, that it's the Amanda Jennings house built in 1892, the style of the house, a little bit about Amanda Jennings. We had kind of hoped that it was built by a ship captain or something romantic like that. It wasn't. Amanda Jennings was just a little old widow lady, but you can always hope. Well, here at Historical Society of Michigan, we decided to start kind of a similar program we call Michigan Heritage Homes, and we do plaques for people, helping them document the history of their house and the date of it, who the original owner was. And so if you have a house that's 100 years old or more, and it's in substantially original condition, you can have it registered as a Michigan Heritage Home, and you can have the plaque for your house. Our house here in St. Joseph would not have qualified for a state historic marker. No association with a famous person or event. A nice house, but it didn't qualify for that state registry, but it would qualify as a Michigan Heritage Home. And our intent is to encourage people to preserve their houses and to show them off a little bit. Hey, I've got a house that's 100 years old, 120 years old, 150 years old. And I want to let people know about that and instill some pride in our built environment, in our historic homes. So not every house has to be a Monticello or a Mount Vernon to have a great history and to be recognized for that history. All right, so that's about the end of the program. I'm going to, and we'll do questions if you have any too, but I do, while you're typing questions in or thinking of some or falling asleep, why, I do have to put in a plug for Historical Society of Michigan. We'd love to have you as a member. We also have, we publish Michigan History Magazine and a members magazine, The Chronicle. Now, if you're a member, you get both magazines. If you want, you can just subscribe to Michigan History Magazine. Michigan History is $24.95. A membership that includes both of the magazines is $39.95. But if you mention that, if you go online to our website, hsmichigan.org, and you mention that you learned about it through Bob's program, they'll take $5 off of either a subscription or a membership. And you get a free set of steak knives with your membership or your subscription. No, actually you don't. That is a big fat lie. You do not get a free set of steak knives, but you do get a great magazine. You get lots of member benefits if you join as a member. So just go to our website there, and you put in, how did you hear about us? And you said, I endured Bob's program, and they take pity on you because they know what it's like to sit through one of my programs, and they'll take $5 off of your membership or your subscription. It won't let you do that on the form. It'll make you sign up for the full amount. But when they see Bob's program, they just refund back to your credit card or send you a check or whatever. They take $5 off. They will do that. And support your local library, like the Bridgman Library. We have great libraries in Michigan, and they deserve our support. We have our street system and sewer and water and fire protection and police protection and trash pickup and that kind of thing, and street cleaning. Those are critical because that is how we live in a community. But our libraries, our parks, our nature centers, our museums, that's why we live in a community. The libraries are a critically important part of the quality of life in our community. It's why you live in a town like Bridgman or St. Joseph or Stevensville or wherever, Grand Ledge. It's because of the quality of life. And so I always tell people, support your libraries. They do wonderful work, and they're why we live in a community. So that's my plug for Historical Society of Michigan and for the Bridgman Public Library.